Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture, one weekly conversation at a time. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and a whole bunch of other venues. Just visit our sites, chimeraobscura.com/VM or vmspod.com to find more information, along with our RSS feed. And follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod. Well, how I'm doing doesn't exactly matter, but I'm fine. We got to see an old pal from grad school for lunch on Friday when she was passing through, and recorded some good shows over the weekend. Last Wednesday, I went into New York in the evening to see the opening of the new art show by Frederick Tutton at Harper's apartment in the East 70s, and I caught up with Frederick for a few minutes in advance of the podcast we're going to record in the next few weeks. Then just kind of walked around Central Park in the golden hour sun. That was nice. And, I guess I did more gabbing and socializing than I've done in a while. Yesterday, I finally booked the trip that is going to put me on a plane for the first time since February 2020. It's a biotech conference in San Diego in June. So, just like in the before time, I plan on going to LA for the weekend before in hopes of recording some conversations. And if you've got ideas for guests, or if you're a pal of mine in LA and just want to meet up, let me know. I will say I had some anxiety and trepidation about booking this. Like I said, haven't been on a plane since February 2020. I get some sort of thrill out of all the planning and logistics and everything, like flights and trains and car rentals and hotels and timing all this stuff and making sure I can get in and get out and optimize the time and blah, blah, blah. But making the commitment to go to an airport and actually get on a plane, that turned out to be kind of fraught. But I'm locked in now, or as of like 3:30 today when the fare hits the 24-hour mark. And the timing does mean my mid-June episode of the show is going to go up a day or two late, unless I haul around my laptop on the trip and put together the podcast on the road. But I get the feeling I'm going to be keeping things pretty stripped down on this one. Anyway, that's more than I thought I'd talk about. Let's get to this week's show. My guest this time is Julie Phillips, who has a fantastic and really amazingly appropriate book out now called The Baby on the Fire Escape: Creativity, Motherhood, and the Mind-Baby Problem, from W.W. Norton. In it, Julie explores the lives of women who were artists or writers and mothers, like Alice Neal, Ursula K. Le Guin, Angela Carter, Audre Lorde, Alice Walker, Louise Bourgeois, and a whole bunch of others. There are major chapters that are bios of a significant woman and artist and mother, and then there are interstitial chapters that bring in briefer stories and other threads and themes with other subjects. Julie does a wonderful job in this book of distilling her subjects' lives, artistic careers, and their paths through motherhood, to really illustrate the dynamics or tensions of the 20th century for women. And these women are all 20th century figures. I really love this book, and she does such a great job of evoking the eras these women went through as the feminist movements and civil rights and other major shifts were happening over the course of the 20th century. And we talk about in the conversation, what's changed for more recent generations and what hasn't when it comes to the intersection of motherhood, art, society, culture, and expectations. Now, I'm posting this the morning after the leak of a draft U.S. Supreme Court decision that purports to end federal protection for a woman's right to abortion. I'm not going to polemicize about that here. I will just note that one of the themes of Julie's book is how scary the process of getting an abortion was for several of her subjects. When it was a back alley procedure, when it wasn't legal, when a woman had to clean out her bank account just to get access to a physician who would perform it. It's awful to think about going back to those days in some parts of this country. At the same time, I know I'm not qualified to talk about this, so I will just, I don't know, ask allies to keep up the fight. So I'm sorry for the tangent, but, you know, it's important. I don't want to distract from Julie's book, though. The Baby on the Fire Escape, it's a fantastic piece of writing, and it really, like I say, gets at key tensions for women in the arts and women in general when it comes to motherhood and life. And the ways her subjects manage to balance or segregate or sort of symbiotically nourish their lives and art is, weirdly, it sort of transcends it in a way. It's sort of inspiring even for a childless man like me. And like I say, her evocation of the seeming past is just dead on and awfully resonant. I devoured this book in a couple of days because the stories are so compelling. The lives she's covering are, we'll say, inspiring in their ways. And the writing is just so crisp. So go get The Baby on the Fire Escape. Trust me, you won't be sorry. Now, as caveats go, her audio gets a little echoey at times, and I was brutally unfair towards Susan Sontag, but that was just me talking trash. Also, I want to thank past guest Gordon Van Gelder, who suggested I connect with Julie. Late last year, he'd sent me a postcard saying she has this book coming out. It looks fantastic. You should get in touch. So, Gordon, thank you very much. Now, here's Julie's bio from the book. Julie Phillips is the National Book Critics Circle award-winning author of James Tiptree, Jr., The Double Life of Alice B. Sheldon, and The Baby on the Fire Escape, Creativity, Motherhood, and the Mind-Baby Problem. A biographer and critic fascinated by questions of gender and creative work, she has written for many publications, including 4 Columns, LitHub, and The New Yorker. The recipient of a Whiting Creative Nonfiction Grant, she lives in Amsterdam with her partner and their 2 children. She is working on a biography of Ursula K. Le Guin, for which she's already promised to come back on the show to discuss. And now, the Virtual Memories conversation with Julie Phillips. Where did The Baby on the Fire Escape originate for you? And how did it, well, we'll ask how it changed over its gestation, as it were, but where did the book start for you?
Yeah, there wasn't one specific point, I don't think. But at some point when you have kids, you can end up being really interested in writers and artists who leave their children. And it's not really usually about actually wanting to leave your children, but it's about, I think, wanting to have your old self back, to have more time for yourself. You know, I remember talking to A.S. Byatt, and she talked about the philosopher Elizabeth Anscombe, who had 7 children and was a prominent philosophy don at Cambridge, and is supposed to have once left her baby on the train when she had, or on the platform when she had to change trains. And it's just this fantasy of being able to be to block out that side of your life so thoroughly that that could happen, but then have that not actually happen. And I I think, motherhood's very seductive. It's very easy to end up giving away more pieces of yourself than you meant to. And I think part of me just wanted to stomp on that sentimental side of mother love. And so I started saying, I'm going to write a book about women who leave their children in order to write. And I thought, oh, that'd be really depressing. Maybe I better put some good examples into. And I think, I'd also just discovered Alice Neal, who had this kind of wonderful voice in interviews. Have you ever read interviews by her? She's so kind of ironic and full of bravado. She reminded me of Alice Sheldon, my first biography subject, in that kind of tough voice covering up a lot of pain and a lot of difficulty in her life that I just found really moving. And so she was the first.
Yeah. And I mean, she's such a, I don't say paradigmatic figure, but I mean, she captures everything you're getting at in terms of, the sacrifices and the balancing and I want to say symbiosis, or those various stages of either trying to separate from the children or having motherhood feed into what the creative act is, and how she manages to integrate those things or characterize them over the course of her career into becoming one of the greatest artists of the 20th century.
Yeah, and motherhood, I think her experience of motherhood really did, deepen and enrich her art in very direct ways. And, that's always what I think mothers, parents who are writers or artists hope is going to happen. And it's kind of wonderful to see when that actually comes to fruition.
So how did the book evolve, and how did your perspective on motherhood and creativity change over the course of it? And it took you a long time because you had kids, right?
It took me a long time because I had kids, because I had I had 6 or 7 people to write about, which is kind of a lot. And I kept going down rabbit holes, and I kept reading more books, and I kept not finding what I wanted. That was the most frustrating thing.
That's exactly one of my questions. How did you manage to limit yourself in terms of those rabbit holes? But we'll get to that over the course of
I don't think
literally wrote it down as
actually.
rabbit holes.
I think my publisher just made me.
I put in brackets "strong editor" next to that. So.
Pretty much. But yeah, how it evolved, like your initial thought. I was trying to write, these essays, and the motherhood part and the literary or the artistic career part kept falling apart. They kept not wanting to cohere into one essay. And I couldn't get motherhood to be a narrative. I couldn't get it to add up to more than, a pile of stuff, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. And, I think even now a lot of mother writing is about immediate impressions and about immediate experiences. And it's not about, what's the shape of a mother's life story. And that's one of the reasons I think that mother writers keep having to reinvent the wheel, keep having to write this story over and over again, because we don't have it's so hard to look from a mother's point of view. It's so hard to tell the story from a mother's point of view that we don't even realize that it's not there, that there isn't a narrative, that there isn't, if you know what the story is, then you can see your story in it. Yeah. But if you don't know what the story is, then you're just like, you're just spinning your wheels in a certain way. Really, a lot of women have, sort of really creatively and interestingly spun their wheels about writing and mothering. But I just wanted there to be kind of an old-fashioned narrative structure of it. Ended up being, for lack of a better word, a hero's journey.
Yeah.
That
and you don't want to say contradictory, but ones that had disparate elements, the different subjects you approach. But I'm being the guy and cutting off the woman who's speaking. Sorry.
I'm being the woman who's worked on a book for too long and can't stop talking about it. But Audre Lorde called motherhood a long and sometimes arduous journey towards self-possession. And I think that is exactly what it is, that it is, a series of moments when you lose yourself and find yourself again, a series of moments when you give away too many pieces of yourself and you have to recollect yourself, when when your attention falls apart and when you have to bring it back together. And, that process of, confronting your own demons, or confronting sort of the demon demands of motherhood, and then, returning from the underworld, in a sense, of with new understanding and new power, is how I ended up seeing motherhood as a story.
Mm. And the choice of focusing on 20th century mother creators, and I get the choice of doing that, but how do you contrast it with women or mothers in the 21st century who are trying to make a go of it? I mean, you have a great Zadie Smith line in there, who was exactly the person I was thinking of when you were focusing on 20th century side of things. But yeah, how do you see that arc changing in the current era?
Yeah,
is it more difficult?
And of course, it changes a lot over the course of the 20th century, just because mothering becomes more of a choice, because, for someone like Alice Neal, she didn't really have a choice. There was no access to contraception. There was, you could maybe get an abortion if you had money and you were lucky and you were in the right place and you knew the right people. Over time, it becomes a choice. It becomes more accepted for women to do both. And in some ways, I think if you're a visual artist, it's still very, very difficult for that to be accepted. And in the 20th century, I think in some ways the choice is incredibly difficult. Sheila Heti's Motherhood is an amazing book about how hard it is to choose motherhood or not to choose motherhood. So there's a lot, so there's a lot more doubt, and should I do this? And then because it's a choice, there's also a lot, if it's possible, I think there might be even more guilt about mothering, and more of a sense that, you have to sort of sacrifice yourself, because, here you are, you've put yourself in this position, you have this responsibility, and you better live up to it, which is kind of oppressive to this, notion that having chosen motherhood, you have to do it right, or you have to be perfect.
Yeah. It's a weird thing, and this gets into a meta indictment of capitalism as we know it, but what the hell, we're on.
Absolutely. You can indict capitalism all you want. And as far as mothers go, yes.
The thing that struck me was just the going through all the travails of motherhood and parenting throughout, the era in which you're covering, and then thinking, we have all of these advanced technologies now, but somehow, it's just as harried, and parents are just as wiped out, and mothers are still running around like goddamn maniacs, just trying to still catch up in a way that, is it that much better than, was it the Ursula Le Guin story with the diapers that they were hanging,
yes,
trying
in the
to
days
wash
before disposable diapers, she was driving across the country to see her husband's family, and they ran out of clean cloth diapers, so they had to wash them in the motel bathroom and then hang them out the window to dry. She said it was like you driving across Texas waving a white flag of surrender at the car.
Which we would understand going through Texas. Speaking of, Christopher Brown sends regards. He just got a copy of the book apparently a day or so ago, mentioned it on Twitter, and it turns out, I guess you guys went to school together or something?
We went to high school together, yeah.
Yeah. And he said, I didn't know her then, but, he's awfully glad to see your work now. So.
Yeah, and I'm really pleased that they're, to have a cohort.
Yeah, to have some strange science fiction connection through all that stuff in Des Moines.
Absolutely.
But yeah, that sense of, as difficult as motherhood was then, it's just as difficult, but in different ways now when things are supposed to be so much easier. as somebody who doesn't have kids and tries not to think about that prospect, it just really, really, a lot of the, I'll say anecdotes that are part of the book really drove that home to me. But the idea of balancing that need for creation with the responsibility of parenting, like you said, the in the introduction, I think the idea that a mother is supposed to be selfless and yet creativity demands a creative self is inherently contradictory. So I'm glad it's a topic that you managed to bring to life like this. So,
yeah. What did you like about the book as somebody who doesn't have kids, is not a mother? I'm really curious what.
I think I don't want to say a triumph of the creative will, but that sense of, what it takes to really commit yourself to making art and to do like you say, good enough to do the best you can as a parent, given how parents who don't go into the arts can screw up their kids in monumental ways. I figured, there's that sense of, well, it's something I was actually corresponding with Gordon Van Gelder, and we were both pondering this, the perspective of the kids. At some point, you bring that in somewhat, when they're around to give, historical context or quotes about their parents or their mothers. But yeah, that sense of what it takes to make that sacrifice and still to be cognizant of what you're giving up, but trying to not necessarily have it both ways, but do the best you can as a parent, and still the people you're bringing in are the ones who succeeded, the ones who've really made something of their art. As parenting, we never know what a success is, but, which is a big chunk of why I don't have kids. I just didn't want to turn out like my dad. That was my number one thing. I figured if I just don't have kids, there's no chance I'll turn out like dad. It's a hit or miss prospect, but but yeah, I thought it was an awful lot about.
That's a very 21st century thing too, to feel like your kids have to be a success. That competitiveness where you become really obsessed with what your kid can, and I'm guilty of this too, of what your kid can do at the age of 6 or 7, because you're hoping that it says something about what kind of person they're going to be when they're 35. Eventually I realized, no, it's not, it's about where you end up. It's not like how far along you are when you're in kindergarten.
Yeah. That's I'll just agree with you, and I'm sure fill you in with anecdotes as we go over the course of this conversation. But
that's kind of a capitalist approach to. I have to say, living in the Netherlands, I had access to subsidized daycare. I had access to affordable health care, and the schools are competitive here, but they're not as intensely competitive as they are in the U.S. And this whole notion of getting into a good college or else your life is going to end or whatever. It's a much, much, much better way of thinking about having kids, and a better approach to raising kids that's saner for both the kids and the parents.
Yeah. What did the book teach you about art or creativity and motherhood in your own life?
I felt the most affinity actually with the people who were who had the happiest time as mothers, because for me, I felt a bit like Ursula Guin. I felt like being a mother gave me a comfortable role in life that was, something that I felt confident about, and something where I felt sure of my place in the world. And that made it easier for me to sort of go out and do my work. But at the same time, I think I got a bit lost when my kids were older, when I lost that assurance, when they didn't need me as much, and when I had more time. I actually started, the more time I had, the more time I started to waste and go down rabbit holes and lose my focus, oddly enough.
That's the flip side of what I was getting at with the sacrifice and making art, because as somebody who has frittered away his first 50 plus years, I appreciate, the artists who actually, gave something up and produced something, as opposed to, those of us who kind of dick around in our spare time or don't get enough done otherwise. But yeah, I could see that with the not over-reliance, the reliance that the younger child will have in your life versus, the pre-empty nest, I guess.
Yeah, I was really surprised at how hard the empty nest hit for everybody in the book. That everybody, I always thought, oh, great artists and writers have kids and they just go right on going, and then they stop being mothers, and then they have these full lives and they just return to these full lives. And it wasn't the case. They all had, motherhood had taken up such a kind of a large place in their hearts and their souls and their selves and their daily lives that they all felt lost for a little while after it. They all had to search, and that's another kind of return to the underworld, if you like. It's another moment where you lose yourself and you have to kind of recollect yourself. And maybe if you're Penelope Fitzgerald, you publish your first book in your late 50s, and before you know it, you've won the Booker Prize. And maybe you are, I wrote about Elizabeth Smart, who wrote By Grand Sensation, I Sat Down and Wept. And she finally got time to write after raising 4 kids as a single mother in her 60s. And by that time, I think she'd really lost her creative momentum, and it was too late. And then you have, of course, incredible artists like Louise Bourgeois who have their first retrospective at 70 and kick into high gear and keep making brilliant art until they're 98, if you're lucky enough to live that long.
Yeah, I'll have to send you the painting I did of one of her sculptures over at Storm King up in New York State. Just because when I was reading the chapter, I'm like, oh, I have to send her my painting of the eyes. It's a really neat thing. But, it's seeing one of my past guests who's been on a few times, Mimi Pond. She's a cartoonist and an artist, and her husband is the artist Wayne White. And they decided, he'll have the career while she raises the kids. And she has told stories on the show. Once they grew up and moved out, she started publishing these long graphic novels about her pre-marriage experience. And her thing was like, I would wait to pick up the kids at school, and the teachers actually gave me a room on the side where I could sit and just work on the story, work on roughs and layouts, with the idea that, 5, 6, 7 years from now, I'll have time to do the finished art and the painting and everything. And it's just, you never know that you're going to have that time is the thing. You can put those things off and you end up like Angela Carter with a very different set of circumstances and a different arc to her career, but you end up dead at 52, 53 years old. And
I wish we still had, she could perfectly well still be around, still having commentary on the scene. I so wish we still had her voice.
Yeah. Who's the subject, whether the full subject or the ones who did who fit into the sort of interstitial chapters? Who's a subject your opinions changed most on over the course of researching and writing? Who did you find you liked more, or who did you just absolutely detest once you really started to look at their lives?
Only
because I wouldn't say it's because the Sontag chapter just seems like, but go on.
It showed, huh?
Well, my thing with Sontag, and I've read very little of her work, but there was a bit in the documentary on HBO about her going to Yugoslavia when it was melting down. I think in Bosnia, she went to, provide artistic help and relief, and stages waiting for Godot for them. And I was like, maybe they'd like something a little more upbeat. Maybe you don't need to go into hell on earth and hand them an existential nightmare. Maybe think of the things an audience would want to see, as opposed to how to bring them down even further somehow.
No, but apparently she was really a hero in Sarajevo. That was actually kind of her great moment. I know, and
I like to snipe and be bitter like that. But it was just one of those, really, that's the thing you chose to stage? But anyway, so who did you end up liking more?
I'm friends with Benjamin Moser, her biographer, so I was I was following that a little bit, and I remember him telling me that. And also him getting kind of frustrated working on the book. And I got frustrated because I loved her so much in the beginning when she first had a kid and she was fantasizing about, having, being a great writer and, being loved. And she was so, she wanted so much to be loved. And at some point, I think she just kind of sold out her authentic self. She thought, I have to choose between being myself and being Susan Sontag, the great writer. And she chose to be Susan Sontag, the great writer. And I think it cost her an authentic relationship with her child. And I found that kind of unforgivable, actually. The people who, mothers who didn't have that, genuine bond with their kid, even if they had been like kind of bad parents, I cheated a bit still. Because I only wrote about women who had thought about or written about their motherhood. And so that implied a level of self-awareness that I think made for better parenting at any rate. I ended up really loving, I loved Alice Neal. I loved Doris Lessing, who's kind of, difficult and impossible and lovable. And I kept, writing about her going, oh God, she's so difficult. I love her so much. She's so, and she's, becoming fascinated by her politics and, because, she was so disappointed when motherhood didn't turn out to be happily ever after. I think that it put her off, made her suspicious of any promises that, that society was making, but that made her a little bit more susceptible to communist propaganda, which is interesting that, having seen through the society that she had, she was still, a believer in the society to come in ways that I think are reflected in a lot of what's going on around us now.
Sure. Well, I always cite Orwell's Inside the Whale essay, where he talks about the writers who came after the modernists, after Joyce and Eliot and English letters, and how essentially these were the guys who destroyed the belief in everything following World War I, but they didn't get rid of the need for belief. And that's why you end up, as he puts it, with Spender and Auden and those guys, and a world in which Hitler is a devil, but Stalin is God, and they basically replace and remap everything with contemporary politics. But this is 1930s British letters.
That makes complete sense. I mean, she's a communist in the 1930s. It makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I'll zap you that essay because it's one of my big touchstones in life, is just going back and rereading Inside the Whale every so often. But ostensibly it's about Henry Miller and Orwell reviewing Tropic of Cancer, but it really encompasses English letters over 40 years in a really fascinating way. That's just me and my thing.
No. I bet, she's an example of the empty nest because when her son went away to boarding school at age 12, she kind of fell apart with the loss of her mother role, which hit right at the time that she had to quit the Communist Party, when she realized that she'd been lied to all the time, and she quit. And, so her life completely fell apart. And that's when she wrote The Golden Notebook, which is about that feeling that, the bits don't come together, the motherhood bit and the writer bit and the lover bit, and all these parts of her life won't fit into one narrative. So she just said, okay, I'm going to put it all together. And the Golden Notebook is it's the notebook where everything's going to fit. All the different notebooks have different colors. There's the black one and the red one and different strands of her life. And the golden one is kind of the imaginary one where all the parts of a woman's life are going to fit together. And I ended up arguing that that's a fantasy and that you just have to kind of have a relationship between the different pieces.
Well, that's what you mentioned in the introduction, that sense of, at the time, divided, which you then, break down into disintegrated self versus the I want to say synergistic, but more, symbiotic relationship, I guess, at least as a potential of motherhood and creativity, and how irreconcilable those are, or are those things, are those different stages one goes through in that hero's journey that you're talking about. There's attempts at trying to reconcile these things and then finding some sort of balance.
Yeah, I think second wave feminism in particular fantasized that, okay, when we get the childcare squared away, when the dads are with the program and are helping, when we have our careers when we're allowed to have careers, and then motherhood's not going to be a problem. And of course, that's what the 21st century mothers are finding out, that even when you have all those things, motherhood is still, intensely, lays an intense claim on your time and yourself.
Yeah.
And so, that sort of, there were a lot of fantasies about work and motherhood in harmony, in concord. And I don't think there is a harmony. I think it's just, leaping over the gaps and piecing together the bits. And that's what I called the baby on the fire escape, that putting together the pieces in relation to each other.
That image being apocryphal, as you point out, there's no evidence the baby was actually left on the fire escape at any time. But.
No, although I was just talking to a painter friend of mine yesterday, and she said, I used to put my kids outside. I had this really warm, sleeping bag for them. They were asleep. I'd put them outside, healthy, fresh air, and I'd go on with my painting. Of course, that's what you do. I think it's a lot more common than, and a lot less scandalous than it's made out to be.
Well, at my age in the 1970s growing up, once we were big enough to toddle around, we would be left out in the front yard here in the suburbs, and nothing bad was expected to happen. But, mom wasn't involved in creative art at that point, but still, yeah, things, the helicopter parenting, I guess, is a very different thing now than it would have been back then, regardless of the mother's aspirations. But, yeah. So tell me about writing about African American or mothers of color in the book. The chapters just feel like they have a slightly different tone when you're writing about Alice Walker, Audre Lorde, and figures like that, that there's the whole other layer of what it means to be Black and a mother and to come up during the civil rights era with children. How different were those chapters for you, I guess, compared to the Caucasian mother artists?
Very much so. And that was one of the reasons.
I'm glad I wasn't imagining it. Good. Okay.
No, not at all. One of the reasons that one of the reasons the book took me so long was that I was confronted with I thought, oh, yes, it's going to be important that the book be diverse and yes, inclusive and so on. And without really understanding the depth of knowledge that required and how far that depth of knowledge was from the actual knowledge that I started out with. And I did a lot of reading, a lot of background reading on African American motherhood, which is, has a whole other set of baggage, I guess, about,
You bring up the community aspect and the other mother aspect, but that's contingent on a lot of situation.
Yeah, there's a lot of, I think, community support for African American motherhood, and there's a lot of support for, there's a notion of strong motherhood that's often absent from white middle class motherhood, that yes, women go out and work, and yes, women are strong. Yes, Black women can do everything. And the question that doesn't always get asked is, who are they doing it for? Are they doing it for themselves? Are they allowed to do creative work for themselves? something that both Gwendolyn Brooks and Alice Walker ran into, for instance, was that they got pushback from their neighbors when they hired babysitters to write, and it was not because they shouldn't be working, because the notion that African American women went to work was no problem, but to hire a babysitter just to sit at a desk was really weird and not okay. That was self-indulgent. And
you didn't want to be the Karen.
I did not want to be the Karen. I really didn't want to be that. And and then Audre Lorde is one of the very few mothers I came across who wrote very explicitly about anger in her parenting, and Adrienne Rich being another one who talked about sort of trying not to bring the anger of the world home into her family the way her parents had, and what to do about it. And and I thought that's really important, but I also don't want it to be sort of the burden of one of the Black women in the book to
carry the whole race.
To carry the anger thing. Like, why does it always have to be the angry Black woman? So I tried to make that a conversation with her and Adrienne Rich. And
I think they're great. I mean, they add, has a complexity or depth to the book that's deep enough as it is. But, once you bring in these elements of race, and especially in that era, it creates such another fascinating matrix, I guess.
Yeah, Alice Walker her life was really, moving to me, and in ways that are appropriate for the current moment, because she just, she spent a lot of time being I don't really want to use the word canceled, but just she got so much criticism from so many different quarters. She was, married to a white man at a time when, if you were a Black radical, that was just not done. And so she got a lot of criticism for her marriage. She was too independent, for Black people. She was too, radical for white people. It just, she wasn't radical enough. There was always something, and she was so very independent minded, and I love that independent mindedness. At some point I pointed out that she and Alice Neal and Audre Lorde were all Aquarians, and that I didn't think that was a coincidence, and that was kind of self-serving because I am one too, but but I did feel a kind of fellow feeling with their intense, independent-minded approach to motherhood. But, and especially after the film of The Color Purple came out, she got so much, grief. And I think, it's reflected in her parenting. It made it harder for her to, it's hard to be a mother and be, and not have the emotional support that you need for your career.
Yeah. It makes me think the third, we'll say third leg or third axis to this isn't just motherhood and creativity, but the creative career, the public facing aspect of being an artist. I mean, it's a subset of being an artist, but the third part of this is, how you're perceived, not just by family and the people around you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little bit different from the people I was writing about, because I'm not, I have no pretensions to artistic greatness. I do think of myself as a crafts person more than an artist. I'm just a biographer. But
A.S. Byatt did the biographer's tale. There's an art to it all. But anyway, sorry.
But I realized that every single one of them had to grow into a public role at some point, and that had an effect on their motherhood too, because motherhood is so private, and yet you are this you also have to take that step of becoming a public person. And it's a risky step and a scary step. And it takes you away from your family. I think Ursula Le Guin didn't like to do readings for a long time because she said, I'm in my comfort zone when I'm home with my family, and I'm, scared of what might happen when I get out of it. And then, of course, she became a wonderful reader and speaker, and, sort of incredible public intellectual. But again, much later and much after her kids were out of the house.
Yeah, it's a weird thing. I've been friends with Samuel Delany for a couple of decades, and the first time we were hanging out with some other writers at ReaderCon, he just mentioned Ursula and an anecdote from there, and I had that moment of, holy shit, he's friends with Ursula Le Guin. Like, it just, like the immensity of a person of that stature, and realizing, yeah, my friend is pals with her, and he's, significant also as an author. But yeah, there was just that holy shit, first name basis with Ursula Le Guin was just one of those reframings of the universe for me.
Whereas I just had somebody say that to me about Samuel R. Delany,
Oh God, people like, oh my God, you're friends with Chip. Yeah, it's the joke I have. We did a documentary together, or a film, that at the premiere, these two very, very, very leather macho gay men showed up in full, accoutrement, really just bound up, and they were giggling like 9-year-old girls. Oh my God, it's Chip Delany! And I just had this he's my pal. I got to know him before I'd actually read his stuff, so it's a different sort of relationship. But yeah, just realizing that he made the people, who you would think would be much more hardcore, were very, very giddy around him was really fun to watch. But but let me ask, were there artists or writers, you mentioned bringing in Sontag, even though she's sort of the opposite, in terms of that self-awareness of motherhood, but artists or writers you wish you could have included in the book?
Oh, lots. Yeah. I mean, I would have gone on forever interviewing artists and writers. I think that Faith Ringgold is really interesting, kind of a brilliant artist, and, who had 2 daughters very young. One of them is the writer Michelle Wallace, and who kind of drew them into her artistic practice, partly because, she needed that support that she wasn't getting from other places. And, I think that led to a certain amount of conflict with her daughters, who, needed their
own lives.
Yeah. Mothers, I have a son and a daughter. And my daughter, especially when she was little, was always trying to get me at the right distance. She was always like, you come here. No, go away. She was always sort of, I felt like I was being moved around like a, store mannequin or something. Yeah. And I just had to let myself sort of be. You don't really realize when you're a parent how large you loom in your children's lives. You feel like you're just, average idiot attempting to cope with, average idiot problems in your idiot way. And, and to them, you're the whole world. And it's very hard to kind of put those two things together in your mind sometimes. But I would have gone on forever about Louise Bourgeois, who had such a breakdown in the 1950s when things really closed down for women. I ended up including a whole chapter about women who were born in the 1910s who had already had a kind of a thriving artistic practice in, by the late 1940s, the way she did, the way Shirley Jackson did, the way Gwendolyn Brooks did, and who saw that shut down in various ways by, in Louis Bourgeois' case by, lack of interest from curators all of a sudden, who'd been interested in her work before. Women's work was out of style. She was stuck with her 3 kids. Shirley Jackson, I think, living in a small town in Vermont and experiencing, communities of mothers can be really supportive the way they were for Audre Lorde, but they can also be really, destructive and critical and, incredibly judgmental. Mothers can be so judgmental of each other, guilty as charged, but I tried so hard not to be in the book, but in my private life I have my opinions, but but
go on.
But she was but the haters got to her through her children in school, and so she went on writing, obviously, but not happily so, I think. And so where was I going with this? So women losing themselves in the 1950s and then coming back in the 1960s, if they were, Shirley Jackson is somebody who who was lost way too soon. All the books she could have written. She was just about to start doing something completely different. Louis Bourgeois coming back in the 60s, building this kind of incredible artistic practice, and then getting a huge studio and realizing, I don't have to make these little pieces. I can make, room-sized. I love her cells, those spaces that, that are just, like viewing the inside of somebody's mind.
I was going to say, it also put me in mind, it's a show I did somewhat recently about Nikki de Saint Phalle, who, American artist, but, French name. But 1930, but, 2 kids with Harry Matthews, they split, he takes the kids. Apparently, that was the arrangement, not, a court-ordered thing. But he took the kids, kept buying her art to support her, but recognized, I can write while raising a 9 and a 5-year-old. You can't make this art, with that burden. So
it's much harder to be a visual artist than a writer with kids, I think, because you just have to be more available, and it is such a discipline that takes so much devotion. My friend, the artist, the one who left her kids outside, said that...
we'll remain nameless until we get off mic, then you can tell me. But okay.
Said she felt like, she wanted to read the book when I talked about Alice Neal being the kind of mother who... paused on Thanksgiving to paint the turkey in the sink. Which she did part. Because there's a painting of it. And she said, yes, that's exactly what it's like, that you have to, when you see something, you need to get it down, no matter what's going on around you.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. I mean, again, as we said near the beginning, Alice Neal captures so much of what you're trying to get at, but she's the primary visual artist you bring up in the book, the one who gets the most space, while the rest of the major chapters, I think, are writers. Although I'm probably misremembering. Am I misremembering?
No, I wanted there to be more artists. I was planning to include both Faith Ringgold and Louis Bourgeois, and my editor wisely said, don't do it. You're going to, it's going to be too much.
Yeah. What was the biggest temptation in those terms? Was it just the too much detail about the lives, or, where were the biggest rabbit holes, I guess, or what were you most concerned about, turning this into a 400-page book instead of about 280 or so?
Well, I actually spent a lot of time looking for kind of theoretical knowledge about motherhood. And that was a really frustrating pursuit. I read Maggie Nelson's The Argonauts, the moment it came out. And there's all this wonderful critical theory in it, and the great quotes from, gender theory, and theories of, about, theories about everything that happens to her except her motherhood, which is like, this sort of, it almost feels like this protected space about which we cannot think except in terms of sort of pure reality without, unembellished experience. And I just think, it's like, you can theorize everything. I even read this book called Histoire de la Merde, The History of Shit, which is this kind of classic parody of critical theory, but it's also about, it's about how to think about sewage systems, more or less. And I'm like, come on, is this history of shit? You have to talk about diapers in here. You're going to talk about diapers in here, right? No diapers, no babies. How can you talk about shit and not talk about babies? And I just kept hoping to find a theory of maternal subjectivity. I love talking about maternal subjectivity because it sounded pretentious and more serious than talking about mothering. And there are a couple of people who write about it. One who says, it's one named Alison Stone, who says it's all about the body. It's all about the sort of the physical experience of mothering. And I found that really reductive. I found that too biological, especially because a lot of mothers, haven't been pregnant, haven't given birth. I love what Angela Carter says, which is, mother is as mother does. There's no other, definition of mother but the person who shows up and does the work. Yeah. In my view. And there's this great book by Lisa Bereitzer, who Maternal Encounters, who talks about mothering is all about interruption. It's about living with an interrupted consciousness. And that was really useful to me in realizing why my essays kept falling apart.
See, again, I don't have that excuse, and that's what's killing me. I probably should have had kids. Anyway, sorry, go on. Yeah.
But in developmental psychology, it's always, everybody always cites Winnicott about the good enough mother. That's a really, I think that's really reassuring for a lot of creative mothers to feel like, you don't have to be a perfect mother. You just have to be good enough. But then I'm like, good enough for who? It's always good enough for the kid. It's never like good enough for yourself. It's never the mother is never at the center of the Oedipal triangle. You're never looking from that corner of the Oedipal triangle at, in Freudian psychology, because it wasn't set up that way. And I feel like it required this massive effort to try to turn it around.
To move the camera over to that corner so you can look out.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. And I ended up relying on this feminist philosopher named Andreana Cavarera, who says subjectivity is biographical. Subjectivity is, as soon as you tell the story of somebody's life, then you can imagine your own life having a story. Then you can believe. If you tell a maternal life story, then you can believe that there is a maternal life story. Mm-hmm. And so, that's obviously very flattering to a biographer to think that you have, you have that power. And so I ran with that. But I still think that there needs to be a lot more theorizing about what maternal subjectivity is.
And the book's just coming out now. So, has there been early response or any feedback along those lines, or even from the advanced copies that were sent out? Or is it something do we want to reconnect on in a couple of years when your next book comes out, which I'm going to ask you in a few minutes? So.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what the response is. Some people kind of My experience of books about motherhood is that either they, you're reading somebody who's thinking along your lines, thinking your thoughts, and you're like, yes, this is it. Or you're reading somebody who's busy with some other aspect of it, who's preoccupied with something else, and you're like, no, this isn't it. And so I think that the responses to my book are going to be very similar, that they're going to be people who say, oh, this is great. And there are going to be people who say, yeah.
It's nothing like this.
One of the nicest responses that I got was from a woman who read it and said, I don't have kids, but my mother is an artist, and, there were 7 of us children, and reading your book really helped me to understand why my mother was the way she was, and how there was always a part of her that she had to keep from us that we couldn't access, because that was what was for her art. And I thought, yeah, you don't have to have kids. You just have to have a mother in order to see.
I get you. So the next book, Ursula Le Guin bio?
Yeah, I've been working on that, as you probably know, for a long time in the background.
Did it predate the work on this book, or did it come out of the research that you were doing for this one?
No, it predated it, actually. Okay. She asked me to be her biographer after my first book came out. James Tiptree Jr., The Double Life of Alice B. Sheldon, which is about as a science fiction writer who wrote under a male pseudonym and had all kinds of intense correspondence with people who thought that they were getting letters from a man and not a woman. And one of those people was Ursula. And, I interviewed her for that book, and I wrote about her. I included her as a character, and she was happy with how that came out. And so she asked me to write about her. She asked me to save her from, she said, if you ever want to save me from the vultures, just ask. That's like the most flattering thing anybody ever said to me. But, I think she felt shy about feeling like even then in 2005, it was to feel like she could claim the right to be important. She could claim to be important enough for a biography, which of course, I was like, I was like, oh my God, Ursula Le Guin, very much in the way that you were describing. And it took me a while to get over my feelings of reverence and really, work out how to talk to her. So and do the book. And we ended up having a series of phone conversations, because I live in Amsterdam and she lives in Portland. And, that turned out to work better than email. Because I think we both needed that immediacy of being able to respond to each other right away. I had the worst time writing her emails in the beginning. Because I felt like I had to live up to her standards of correspondence. And she was so good at, even just a casual email from her was like, 3 times.
I have to save this. I have to print this out and save this.
Eventually I started looking into her archives and looking at her other correspondence and realizing, she's used to dealing with people who are just like, other people who write to her and with whom she has really intense, enjoyable correspondences are not like, the geniuses of the planet either. So then I felt a little bit better about it.
See, for me, it helped that Chip Delaney is dyslexic, and that meant the emails were never going to be, these grand written statements or anything. It was this is Chip. It's fine. It got me on it got me accustomed to him as a human being as opposed to a genius. But yeah. But from that, it evolved.
A human being as well as a genius.
Yes, well, he is a genius. He's one of the few people I would actually ascribe genius to, because we know that term gets thrown around a lot. But he's one of the few that. I mean, as we've gotten older, things have gotten weirder. But that's a case for all of us if we get there. But you're making progress with
Yeah,
with the
actually,
bio now?
another reason I wanted to write about mother writers was because I knew I was going to write another book about a science fiction writer, and I wanted to write about a non-science fiction writer in between, just so because I thought, well, eventually I'm going to run out of science fiction writers to write about, and maybe I should vary my game a little bit.
I told you, Gordon Van Gelder suggests the "I was the baby on the fire" escape, that you need to do the children of these mother artists. But I'm just saying.
Maybe that would be interesting. One of my favorite sort of children of story is from the daughter of Frida Lawrence, Barbara Weekly, who was the most forgiving of the three children for Frida Lawrence, running off with D.H. Lawrence. And then, of course, she was somebody else who she left, but she desperately wanted to see her kids. But, she lost custody when she left, and her ex wouldn't let her see the kids she used to hang around outside school hoping to catch a glimpse of them. But her daughter said, I'm convinced that my mother did the right thing in leaving. And all the really boring women who have said, oh, I could never leave my children, have done a lot to convince me. So whenever I wanted to stomp on sentimentality, I would think of that.
Gotcha.
It's like a terrible thing to say to anybody.
Well, no, this is
you have to think of me as saying it to myself.
No, my sister-in-law, she and my wife have corresponded because there are some, I think, Reddit group or something, or Facebook group or whatever, of moms who just admitting to other moms some of the stuff they've done, like the kid just refusing to put the seatbelt on and giving the mom crap the whole time, and the mom will just hit the brakes and just things that you shouldn't do, but just in the moment, sometimes you're not hurting them, but yeah, just occasionally the human aspect as opposed to the saintly mother aspect comes out. But tell me your history with science fiction and fantasy. Getting away from the book, what's your how did you get into this whole space?
Reading it as a kid and as an adolescent, and then kind of moving away from it for a long time, deciding that I was going to switching to literature and feeling like that, experiencing that as a kind of growing up and becoming a serious person, and then discovering that science fiction was actually much more serious than I had thought it was, which had a lot to do with Tiptree. I read an article in the Women's Review of Books, Susie McKeecher. I'm always disappointing people with the story of how I came to write the Tiptree book, because it ought to be a bunch of old letters in an attic. It ought to be, a glimpse of somebody in the distance. It ought to be somebody's great aunt. But it was Susie McKee-Charnas writing an article in the Women's Review of Books about the Tiptree Award, and me thinking, oh, that sounds really interesting. And I'm interested in feminism, and I haven't read science fiction in a long time, but I could certainly start. And going to ReaderCon to check out the Tiptree, in 1994 to the Tiptree Awards ceremony, and going down a rabbit hole and discovering this incredible voice, especially in her letters. I really fell in love with her voice. That, I remember, her saying, talking about, I think she got a letter from Robert Silverberg on his wife's stationery, and she said, ooh, I thought I was getting a letter from your wife. I thought I better shave and put on lotion before continuing. Yeah, here she is pretending to be a man, but, you can see the woman in love behind it, or the person in love. I'm not sure. one of the things I would have done differently with that book if I had had it to do over would be to consider much greater length the possibility that Alice Sheldon was a trans person.
Yeah. It's, again, times that we just, as you characterize in the book, what people went through in ways that we don't really relate necessarily nowadays, and just understanding how different times were. For me, it's usually when I interview older gay men and realize just how difficult it was, once upon a time. And, depending on where you are geographically, it's difficult now, but, understanding what mid 20th century was like in certain ways for a lot of these people. But, and was the SF you were reading back then when you were young, I would say forgettable, but, not the canonical stuff? Because my whole thing was, space opera, Harry Harrison, stainless steel rat novels alongside the Asimovs and the smart science fiction. Did you lump more into the pop version, or were you reading sort of canonical stuff when you were a kid and just kind of moved away from
Oh, I just read whatever came across my path. All of Anne McCaffrey's Pern books, which I haven't revisited, but they were, I thought they were wonderful at the time, and probably still are. I'd be curious to go back and look at those. I was with my son at a book fair on Friday, and we were looking at a table of old science fiction paperbacks, and there was one of the stainless steel rat books, and I was like, that was pretty good when I was 15. I have no idea what I'd think of it now.
I am, well, again, no idea whatsoever. The only thing I've got is my original Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy from like 1984. So it's a few shelves over from where I'm sitting. You can't actually tell what it is because the spine is completely disintegrated. So it's just rubber band holding a bunch of pages together. But yeah, that's different genre a bit, but still just the things that meant the world to us when we were kids. So,
yeah. But anyway, if you have any questions about Ursula Le Guin, I've been going on about her a lot lately, so I can.
I haven't read her in a million years, and I have to. I actually bought one of the Library of America editions, but it was one of those things, the unconsciously sexist reading practice or reading patterns and all that, and the same reason Alice Sheldon would be James Tiptree. Just some reason that I can probably define pretty well, but sound like a bad guy in the process. I've read more books by men than women over the years. So I'm, same thing with the podcast. I've really make a conscious effort to make sure I'm not just interviewing white men in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, because I tend to fall into that. So
it's hard. That was something that I really saw when I started, reading Black women and looking into Black women's experience was not just that it's a little bit difficult to get out of your comfort zone or your familiarity zone, but just how much your familiarity zone keeps pulling you back in.
Yeah.
Just how,
if you don't make a conscious effort. Yeah.
And a really sustained conscious effort not to read the same old stuff, not to read the familiar stuff, but to move beyond that into experiences that are different from your own.
And that's a thing that your book does fantastically. It's actually given me a couple of things to start pursuing and reading, which is what I love about this show in general, that it keeps opening me up to more books and more perspectives. So,
there's so many good books about motherhood. And read Audre Lorde. Audre Lorde is just so kind of sustainedly great all the time.
Yeah, you have managed to guess that I have not read a word of her work before this. So yes, I appreciate all the people you've opened me up to over the course of the Baby on the Fire Escape.
It's been a pleasure.
And that was Julie Phillips. Her new book is The Baby on the Fire Escape, Creativity, Motherhood, and the Mind-Baby Problem from W.W. Norton. It's out now. It's in good bookstores. It really is a fantastic book, and I'm awfully glad Gordon Van Gelder connected us. And after reading this one, I'm really looking forward to her Ursula Le Guin book in a few years, and I have ordered some books from a few of the writers she covered in The Baby on the Fire Escape, as we talk about near the end, and my horrendous lacunae when it comes to women authors. Anyway, you can find more of Julie's work at her site, julie-phillips.com, which is JULIE-PHILLIPS.com. She's on Twitter as JCF Phillips and on Instagram as Julie Van Phillips. I will have links to all of that in the show and episode notes for this one. Now, you can support the Virtual Memories Show by telling other people about it. Tell them about this podcast that's out there doing really interesting conversations with creative people every single week. And you can also support it by telling me what you like and don't like about the show, who you'd want to hear me record with. Gordon always gives me great suggestions. I hope you guys will send me some ideas too. You can also just let me know what movie or TV show or book or piece of music or art or comic or piece of theater or whatever you think I should turn listeners onto. And you can do that by sending me an email, a postcard, letters. If you're on my weekly email list, my address is at the bottom of that, and you can mail me something that way. Or you can leave me a message at my Google Voice number, which is 973-869-9659. That goes straight to voicemail, so you don't have to worry about me picking up and getting stuck in an awkward conversation. And messages can be up to 3 minutes long, so if you got a lot to say, be prepared to call back in. And let me know if it would be okay to include your message in an upcoming episode of the show. I would never do that without the speaker's permission, but you might have something you want listeners to hear. Now, if you've got money to spare, don't give it to me. I've got that patreon.com/VMSpod, but really, I'm doing just fine with money. My expenses are pretty low. I still don't travel much for the show, so there's all that. If you do have money or other resources to spare, I hope you'll give it to individuals or institutions in need. For individuals, you can go through crowdfunding platforms like GoFundMe, Patreon, Kickstarter, Geppetto Go. There are other ones that are out there. And if you're looking for somewhere to start with institutions or foundations, well, I always give to my local food bank and occasionally give to the Poor People's Campaign, but there are a lot of different things you can do, like freedom funds, election funds. Well, there's going to be women's choice funds and, ways of supporting Planned Parenthood and other groups that'll help preserve a woman's right to choose. So I just hope you'll help us build a better world, okay? Our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. You should visit my archives to check out my episode with Hal from the summer of 2018 and learn more about his art and painting. And you can listen to his music at soundcloud.com/Mayforth. And that's MAY4TH. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another great conversation. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSpod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube, Spotify, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please tell your pals, talk it up on social media, and go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. It all goes to helping us build a bigger audience. You've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.